Welcome everyone to REFED's new webinar series, Following the Roadmap to 2030, Taking Action to Reduce US Food Waste by 50%. This is the second of a 7-part series that digs deeper into the data and solutions highlighted in REFED's Roadmap to 2030 and the REFED Insights Engine. Each installment is based on one of the 7 key action areas in the Roadmap to 2030. As we host each new installment every month between now and November, we'll not only walk you through what the data is telling us, but we'll also be assembling a team of experts who can really help us bring this data to life through their lived experiences and perspectives. I just want to take a quick moment to recognize our media partner for this series, Food Tank. I'm sure most of you know who they are, but for those of you who don't, Food Tank is a global community of safe, nourished, and healthy eaters working to educate, inspire, advocate, and create change in the food system. You can find them at foodtank.com, and we really appreciate them collaborating with us. Now, on our last webinar, our focus was on the first key action area in the Roadmap to 2030, optimize the harvest. And this month, we'll be exploring the second key action area, enhanced product distribution. And before we introduce our moderator and panelists, we're going to take a few minutes to familiarize everyone with REFED and share more information about today's key action area. So REFED is a national nonprofit working to end food loss and waste by advancing data-driven solutions. Our vision, which we know that a lot of you share with us, is a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient food system that makes the best use of the food that we grow. One of the things we do is try to facilitate action among our stakeholders. We're known for our food waste data and solutions, but how can we help people use that information to take action? Well, one of the ways we do that is through events like this. And if you want to participate in more REFED events and activities, I encourage you to sign up for the brand new REFED Food Waste Action Network. It's an evolution of our expert network and other groups we've hosted that's designed to inspire real action and collaboration between individuals and organizations from across the food system. Today's event is open to everyone, but we will be hosting some exclusive events that are for REFED's Food Waste Action Network members only. And members can also participate in a range of other opportunities like our lunch and learns and innovation demo days to network and gain more knowledge. It's absolutely free for you to sign up, and you can do it by using the link that you see here on the screen or by emailing us at insights@refed.com. We're also putting the link in the chat box now, so you'll see that come through. I really hope you enjoy this amazing network, and feel free to share this information with anyone in your network. But speaking of the network, and just out of curiosity, wanted to ask the question how many of you have already joined the network? So I see some answers coming through on this poll. I'll give a few more seconds to give some people to submit their response. Great, that's awesome. It looks like people are starting to sign up. Well, once again, this is a brand new opportunity. So if you haven't joined yet, we encourage you to do so. And if you're interested in our topic today, you should really be part of the Food Waste Action Network. So now let's get back to the topic at hand. As many of you know, in February of this year, REFED introduced 2 new and free resources that are available right now on our website: the REFED Insights Engine and the Roadmap to 2030. These resources help support the food system's efforts to cut food waste in half by 2030. The Insights Engine is an online hub for data and insights about food waste, featuring a detailed cost-benefit analysis of more than 40 food waste reduction solutions, impact estimates, a directory of solution providers ready to partner on food waste reduction initiatives, and more. We also introduced an updated version of our 2016 Roadmap to Reduce US Food Waste called the Roadmap to 2030. It introduces a framework with 7 key action areas for the food system to align around, each of which will be a monthly discussion focus for this webinar series. And you'll see under each of these 7 key action areas, we've analyzed more than 40 solutions and best practices along with their impact potential. And by implementing these solutions with an annual investment of approximately $14 billion, REFED estimates that each year we see a reduction of 45 million tons of waste. That's more than half of what's currently generated. And there's a range of other benefits like greenhouse gas emission reductions, water savings, meals recovered, and jobs created. And that's why we're here today and hosting this webinar series. Our goal is to get all of this information off the page and to bring it to life so that it can support your food waste reduction efforts. Now, as you know, today's installment focuses on the Roadmap to 2030 second key action area, enhanced product distribution. Now, when we say enhanced product distribution, what we mean is harnessing the power of technology to create smart systems to efficiently move products, thereby maximizing freshness and selling time. In general, food loss and waste through distribution activities is comparatively low across the supply chain. But food's journey through packing houses, on trucks, and into storage and distribution centers has an enormous impact on our food's quality, flavor, shelf life, and whether it ultimately gets eaten or thrown in the trash once it gets to its destination. This information from the ReFed Insights Engine, as you can see, waste happens across the food system and all sectors are affected. But it's those spaces in between the sectors where food products go from one stage of the supply chain to the next. And that's what we really want to focus on today. Now, our Insights Engine analysis shows that by addressing the inefficiencies and gaps in product distribution with targeted solutions, we can divert 3.3 million tons of food waste annually. Plus, we can cut greenhouse gas emissions by 7.1 million metric tons and save nearly 530 billion gallons of water each year. The solutions we've detailed on the Insights Engine would take approximately $2.1 billion each year to implement, but there'd be an annual estimated financial benefit of $8.4 billion. Now that's a 4-to-1 return. So how can we take meaningful action to do this? Well, what you're seeing on the screen now are some of the top solutions for enhancing product distribution based on the net financial benefit and total food waste tons diverted. This information came from ReFed's Insights Engine, where we've also ranked solutions based on other impact metrics, like reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, water saved, and meals recovered. You'll see that our solutions include intelligent routing, decreased transit time, first expired, first out, a little different from first in, first out, temperature monitoring, and reduced warehouse handling. And we'll be talking about some of these solutions today, as well as other emerging solutions like hyperspectral imaging and more. But before we dive in, I have one more poll question for the audience. What type of capital is most needed to scale these top solutions? Let's take a second and give everyone a chance to submit their responses. See some answers coming through. A couple seconds. All right, you guys got it right. The answer is corporate finance and spending. So ReFed estimates that nearly 75% of the financial investment in this action area should come from corporate finance and spending. The reality is a majority of product distribution solutions, such as intelligent routing, temperature monitoring, and decreased transit time, are geared towards increasing the efficiency of internal operations. So they'll require corporations' internal capital to purchase and implement, as well as change behaviors of employees through training and incentives. So what does this all actually mean on the ground? Well, that's what our stellar group of speakers will be discussing today. And with that, I am beyond excited to introduce our guest moderator for today. This fantastic woman leads Deloitte's work on food waste in the US and is a recognized expert on food sustainability and decarbonization across the food value chain. Her work focuses on business strategy engagements with retail and consumer product clients that use sustainability as a tool to improve resiliency, capitalize on ESG, and reduce risk. Prior to Deloitte, she spent 3 years in corporate responsibility consulting at Business for Social Responsibility. Welcome, Blythe Chorn. I'm so happy to have you on this call. Thank you for being here, and please take it away. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Angel. And thank you to everybody for joining today. I've been watching the chat on the right-hand side of my screen and notice we have participants from all the way from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Honolulu, Hawaii. So welcome, everybody. I'm thrilled to have you all here today. What Angel didn't mention is that I've had the honor of being involved with ReFed since before it was ReFed, when we did the initial analysis for the roadmap back in 2015, and to see all of the participants here today and all of the excitement about this space is just so gratifying. So really excited to have everybody here, and I'm going to do a quick introduction of our panelists and then be quiet so that you can hear from all of them about all of the great work that they're doing every day on food waste reduction. So with that, bear with me for a minute while I read through some quick introductions and hopefully get all the details right, and then we'll turn it over to our panelists. First off, we have Jess Vieira, who leads sustainability at Appeal, using data-driven analyses to maximize the net environmental and societal benefits of Appeal's products and operations. Jess also sits on the advisory committee for Kroger's Zero Hunger, Zero Waste Foundation Innovation Fund, which was established to help support new systems and technologies reshaping the food supply chain. We're also joined by Eric Weaver, who is the founder and CEO of Transparent Path, which uses continuously connected IoT sensors, edge computing, and artificial intelligence to create real-time supply chain visibility. Eric is a longtime digital disruptor who has been at the leading edge of multiple waves of innovation. He was one of the first digital marketers, started way back in 1990, and we're thrilled that he and his organization, Transparent Path, are applying their experience to the topic of food waste now. And then finally, we're joined by Abhinav Bahel, who manages social impact strategy and initiatives for Uber's mobility and delivery businesses. He leads programs and partnerships that leverage Uber's platform to address equitable access to essential goods and services in underserved communities across the country. Prior to Uber, Abhinav spent over a decade working for nonprofits and international organizations on programs at the intersection of community engagement, policy, and the use of technology and data. So thank you to each of our panelists for joining us today. I thought that we would get started by talking about the unique solutions that each of these organizations is bringing to the topic of food waste reduction and transportation. So we know, as Angel mentioned, from the insights engine, that transporting food from where it's produced to where it gets processed or ultimately sold and consumed is complicated under any circumstances. But obviously the challenge increases with time-sensitive products, strict quality standards, and specific temperature requirements. We've found out through the insights engine and the latest analysis of food waste across the US that enhancing product distribution has the potential to prevent 3.3 million tons of food waste annually. And there are a number of different solutions to help realize this impact, including, like Angel mentioned, intelligent routing, decreased transit time, temperature monitoring, et cetera. And so I'd love to start our conversation today by hearing from the panelists a little bit about each of the organizations that they represent, their unique solutions, and how they enhance product distribution. So if it's okay, we'll just go in the order that we did introductions, and we'll kick it off with Jess from Appeal.
Thank you, Blythe, and thank you to yourself and Angel for kicking us off, and to ReFed for hosting these dialogues. I think it's so important to go beyond just the insights to get the conversation going too. So you may know of Appeal for our plant-derived coating solution that's applied to fresh fruits and vegetables that creates additional time. So produce with this edible coating lasts twice as long as it does without. But Appeal is actually thinking about food waste across the produce supply chain beyond just the integration of this plant-derived coating technology. We're also thinking about, what do we do with this additional time? And so since Appeal, the way that we integrate our solution is by installing application systems within packing houses in the upstream supply chain, we have this view of the system that, looking at what the implications of our product at retail, seeing the reductions there in food waste. We've seen a 50% reduction of food waste on retail shelves with the use of our product. and engaging with consumers as a consumer-facing brand, but we're also seeing, what's happening upstream in the supply chain and how do decisions at those stages also influence food waste outcomes downstream. And we know that in addition, it's going to take so many different technologies and solutions to solve these problems. And so we're actually looking at this issue of data and developing smarter distribution, as well as developing solutions like our coding technology. And so we recently acquired Impact Vision, an organization that focuses on hyperspectral imaging and using our position within these supply chains where we already have these application systems set up to trial and test advanced imaging technologies as a way to improve the routing and distribution of produce. The perfect example is, the avocado. If you could know without destroying the avocado, breaking it open, if you could know just from a picture, which ones should go to the guacamole factory, which ones should be sent to export, which ones should stay in the local market, imagine the additional food waste that you could reduce. And so we're really looking at, time and data and how we use additional solutions to optimize the two and help, with others on this call too, bring food waste closer to zero.
Great. Thanks so much for that quick introduction, Jess. I'll turn it over to Eric to introduce us to Transparent Path.
Thanks, Blythe, and hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So we're a Seattle-based social purpose corporation. We're working in the real-time visibility space. We use continuously connected IoT devices, sensors, edge computing, and AI to keep an eye on perishables as they transit the supply chain. Our technology alerts our customers when something's going sideways, which happens more often than we'd like to admit, and to sort of bring the supply chain into the present so they can save these shipments of perishables. And we also have developed AI to allow them to anticipate supply chain failures in the future as well. So by saving these shipments, we're keeping food and other perishables out of landfills. There are other folks in the visibility space, but we're different in two ways. First, we're developing printed sensors. This is something that started with my previous employer, Xerox. By using printed sensors, printed batteries, and other components, we're working to drop the cost of monitoring the cold chain significantly. It's one of our biggest challenges is the cost conversation and why a lot of people don't get involved in it. Right now, the first thing customers want to hear is how much more cost does this add to each shipment? And imagine ditching temp tails and all these devices that end up in landfills for connected paper labels that someday will be compostable. We're working with a couple of universities right now to create compostable sensors, which is super exciting. I can't imagine feeling good about tracking individual cases, crates, or packages in the cold chain if I'm dumping millions of sensors into the waste stream. And the other thing way we're different is that we've developed something called Fresh Score. Fresh Score is basically a credit score for freshness. Using our sensors and predictive algorithms and the data that we're collecting, we can predict a freshness rating for any product that uses our system. So if we predict freshness and intelligently prescribe supply chain routing changes, for example, mid-transit, all optimized around freshness, then we can reduce rejections by retailers and reduce food that's going into landfills.
Great. Thanks so much for being here today, Eric. And finally, I'll turn it over to Abhinav to tell us about Uber's work in this space.
Great. Well, thanks, Blythe, and thanks, Refed, for hosting us. Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. And thanks so much for having me on the panel. I'm excited to share more about our work on how Uber can enhance food distribution to tackle food waste and insecurity. Most of you probably know Uber as the company that provides free rides to everyone, where you can get an Uber at a touch of a button. Some of you may know Uber through ordering food from your restaurants, that are delivered to your door. But we have another flagship line of business called Uber Freight. And you can think of it as Uber for the logistics industry, which is an important part of the solution when it comes to tackling food waste. And I'm excited to share a little bit more on how Uber Freight is stepping up, to support work in this area. As for me, I work on the social impact team at Uber. And what we do at Social Impact is, we develop initiatives to use our core capabilities across the mobility, our Uber Eats delivery, as well as our freight businesses for the public good. So what we really bring here is, the scale and the power of a platform to tackle some of these challenges. And the view that we generally take is one of equity and access, and how do we specifically address transportation as a barrier to access. And we typically would do this, in partnership with nonprofits that have specific subject matter expertise or relationships in communities. And so, in this particular space, with addressing, distribution of food, and particularly trying to find ways to transport food and move it from areas of need that otherwise, would result in food being wasted. What we bring is sort of the heft and the scale of Uber's freight platform to really move food en masse to where it needs to be before it's discarded for waste.
That's fantastic. Thank you all again for joining today. We're really excited to dig in and understand a little bit more about what some of these technologies and approaches look like in practice. But maybe to give you a hardball to start after those introductions, let's talk about challenges. I think, like many of our participants here today, I think many of us have been around this space for several years and seen kind of the evolution of understanding of food waste, the impacts that it has, and also the value that can be recovered. But I'm curious what you all see as some of the persistent challenges that the food system is facing in terms of efficient food distribution, and what progress you've seen made, and maybe where there's still improvement needed.
Sure, I can take the first stab there. So for highly perishable food like fresh fruits and vegetables, which is where we live right now at Appeal, there's very little data and insights being used to understand how the food moves throughout the supply chain. So because it's a highly commoditized industry as well, there's not a lot of attention on which produce should be going where when. We go to the grocery store, and how do we decide which one we want? We feel it, maybe we smell it. It's highly subjective, and that's how a lot of decisions are made upstream in the supply chain as well, because we just don't have the data in real time in ways that are manageable to really integrate in an efficient way throughout the supply chain to make better decisions. And so, I know it's a lot of what we're talking about today, but the lack of actionable data to make better decisions is a challenge that has, continues to exist, and I think we're starting to chip away at it now.
Yeah, curious, Eric. You spend a lot of your time thinking about data and connectivity. So curious what your reactions would be to that comment.
Well, so there's really, the way I see it, there are three big challenges. The first one is education. We hear all these case studies about AI and all these super cool technologies out there. But the reality is that for a lot of America, a lot of the food chain, just generally in the world, is still paper-based. I didn't even know you could buy a fax machine in 2021. And there's so much of the supply chain that's being run by fax machine, filing cabinets, copy machines. It blows my mind. And so there's a sort of a status quo, right, of these paper-based systems where I'm a driver and I want to wave around my receipt to my boss and say, look, I got a printed copy proving I delivered on time and within compliance. So there's this education of what could be and what the savings are and what the benefits are that has to be made across the industry. So that's one. How common is it without this lack of visibility in real time to have cherries sitting on a dock in customs for 6 weeks, and then they get released and they're all moldy, and then it's just like, hey, cherry packing house, you sent me bad cherries. Or a story I heard, a load of crab meat that sat at room temperature on a dock for a week, no one knew, got delivered to Walmart, and then ended up getting dumped, or a driver goes AWOL. We see it when we're tracking drivers. We can see what's going on, or that a truck gets hijacked, with this growing trend of cargo theft. So all this happens more frequently than we might think. And then the last thing I'd add is that, we have a number of solutions that are coming on market to give us this data, but there's not a lot of insights. It's not very prescriptive. It's here's your dashboard and here's a million numbers to look at. And for most folks who are not tech savvy, okay, this is great. What do I do with this? So I think those are three things that are problematic right now.
No, Abhinav, do you want to?
Sure. I'd like to pick up on Eric's point about, what could be, and particularly in the transportation sector and the logistics industry, as Eric pointed out, a lot of it is still phone-based and paper-based. That's where sort of, we think Uber Freight could be really helpful. Now, at the top of the webinar, we talked about, at different stages of the supply chain, there are points of failure, that result in waste. And I guess the requirement is how can we efficiently and provide timely transportation of food where it needs to be at each of those stages, right? So let's say, during post-harvest or during pre-retail processing when it needs to occur, and let's say a greens processor has inventory with a 9-day shelf life, but it cannot be stocked because of 10-day requirements on retailers. Now you got to move that inventory quickly and at scale. And how do you do that in an industry that relies on, let's say, phone calls to brokers or freight brokers or paperwork? And that's where we think, kind of an Uber-based platform that literally connects shippers, folks who want to send stuff to carriers who can ship stuff immediately, and having access to transparency as it relates to pricing, as well as quickly connecting and allow you to efficiently connect and get a clear view of what the cost might be, and then sourcing those transportation brokers. I think that's where transportation is like a critical challenge that needs to be addressed.
And if I could add one more thing, building off of Eric's point about education, I think that, probably everyone on this call understands that food waste is kind of this invisible problem to some extent. And we think about it as this invisible tax on the system. We look at those numbers that Angel presented about the return on investment for some of these solutions. And I think that the education, in addition to, educating consumers and driving demand for these things back in through the supply chain, also just educating around how this could create value. So thinking about food waste as an untapped savings account, not just this invisible tax on the system, is something that you're starting to see shift with things like, the Kroger Innovation Fund, like investing in these solutions as business opportunities, is something that I think, I'd love to see there be a lot more momentum behind.
Yes, you're totally. Oh, please go ahead, Eric.
I'm sorry. One thing I wanted to add too is, I think we're seeing change exhaustion, or we're drowning people in solutions, right? So when I talk to truck drivers and I say, I want to put one of these in your truck, they're like, well, I don't want the government tracking me. I'm like, we're not the government. We're not tracking you. We're tracking the food. It's like we've pushed people so hard to change. And I think there's a natural digging in of heels happening right now, that is understandable, and yet super frustrating if you know what the tech can do. So I just wanted to throw that in there too.
Yeah, it's interesting because you guys are completely speaking my language in terms of how I spend my days, which is working a little bit further down the value chain particularly with retailers and large restaurant companies, and helping them explore use of these pilots or the use of these solutions, for just exactly what you said, moving just beyond even cost reduction into value generation. So if we can move product faster through the supply chain, do we not only waste less, but do we actually improve the quality and improve our customer loyalty and customer satisfaction by getting fresher strawberries or fresher lettuce that then lasts longer in our consumers' refrigerators to them. But something that we run into a lot at Deloitte is what we internally refer to as death by pilot. Whereas, and I think, Eric, this is exactly what you were talking about. We make a lot of progress with a lot of the companies that we work with piloting these different solutions, and often are able to show a real positive P&L impact for these companies. But then to actually scale becomes very challenging. And I think you were talking about the change management aspect of this, and that it's not just about installing another big system, but it's asking individual truck drivers to change their behavior or to do something different in their day-to-day jobs. And I'm curious if that's something that you all are running into as well, if you have any success stories of moving from this pilot stage of, yeah, we'll give it a try on one category or one region to, yep, we're gonna actually implement this across our value chain because we see the impact that it can have.
Sure,
Here.
Happy to go first again. So, I mean, the way that we think about it at Appeal, we try to look, end to end and how our product creates value across the entire value chain. And I think the real big piece of that gets it past just this small, what happened in this given scenario for this given stakeholder is looking at the consumer and really engaging the consumer, and so that they understand the benefits of these technologies. People are making decisions using their purchase power to buy more sustainable options. Products need to have more than just sustainability benefits. They have to have product performance, and they have to be still, they can't compromise on some of the other dimensions. But really engaging and educating the consumer and driving that demand back through the supply chain and having there be a market rationale for why someone wants to have this as widely available as possible. I think that's really how we're thinking about it at Appeal right now.
We did a consumer study last year and found that 94% of consumers want more transparency in their food. And when you're working in the B2B space, you forget about that driver, right? That behavioral change driver. And 55%, encouragingly, said they'd actually pay more for information about a product when they purchased it. So I think, to Jess's point, we often overlook that, the consumer driver, and that the consumers are a hugely important voice in all of this.
It's a great perspective. Abhinav, anything to add from your perspective?
No, I think I just want to call out, the pilot fatigue is a genuine challenge, and I think, Uber provides the sort of the transportation layer, logistics layer, where we can plug in, and the question is, can we plug in at the right moments in a particular company's or a nonprofit's, strategic plans or, their programming lifecycle, right? And I think there is a tendency for us to find, in order to kind of, demonstrate, forward movement, to kind of work with a pilot. But then the question of scale beyond the pilot is still an ongoing question on how can we specifically make that happen, particularly in the food waste, area and demand.
Yeah. Totally understand. So to that point, I wonder if you can tell us about some of the partnerships that have been established that are really helping to take Uber's impact to the next level, and what maybe were some of the success factors for those partnerships, and as you think about future partnership development.
Sure, that's a great question. So, maybe I can call out our partnership with the Farmlink project. And this is essentially, a grassroots food movement that seeks to redirect food that otherwise would be wasted, and address food insecurity. And it was really born out of sort of COVID-19, in the early parts of the pandemic, when, economies were shutting down. Folks couldn't get to places where food insecure folks, where they needed food. And then, with Farmlink, what we provided was, through our Uber Freight platform, for them to access and ship freight loads of food that otherwise would be thrown away, at low costs. And what started as a couple of, truckloads of, surplus potatoes that was sent from one farm to a food bank, it became eventually an initiative that we provided, where we moved about 15 million pounds of food. And, and we would like to see how we could continue to build on that and continue to have additional partnerships where we do that. And I think, one of the keys to this growth was the sort of flexibility of the platform's offerings. What it allowed organizations like, Farmlink was, it just kind of works kind of like Uber, where, if you need to move something really quickly, and folks who might not be shippers by trade, they're like the folks at Farmlink. It just allows them to quickly access, transportation and ways of where they can book loads and move them to food banks where they need them. And then what it enabled Farmlink to do is also kind of look down to like at a 2-week window period to see, where there might be cheaper rates they might be getting. So it offers that sort of transparency to them that was extremely beneficial. And this is particularly important, since produce deliveries require, they require, specific temperature requirements and when they create the load and when they can ship the load, and making all of that work and matching those different components and bringing them together can be a challenge. And I think Freight was one of them, was a platform that really made that happen. And so we follow kind of a similar model with other organizations we worked with. We worked with Feeding America's network of food. We worked with Dot Foods, one of our customers, on logistics to move about 720,000 pounds of food. And then we, worked with Second Harvest in Canada to move about 3 million pounds of food to underserved communities across the United States. So we've created a lot of these partnerships with nonprofits, as well as leveraged our own network of suppliers to move food where it needs to be in a timely fashion. But I think a lot more can be done, right? And how can we do this in a way that is scalable across different parts of the United States? And I think finding the right partners is really the key, and the right partners who have the capacity to kind of move quickly, is a crucial key for us as well.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Very interesting to hear about the COVID response as well. I know my whole world kind of not just individually but professionally kind of came to a screeching halt as we all tried to reorganize and think about how do we build supply chains in completely different ways. So it's great to hear about that innovation and start as we come out of COVID talking about wins from that time and innovations that we want to take forward. On that point of transparency, though, Eric, would love to hear a little bit more about the work that you all have been doing. I know you're doing some of the dreaded P word pilots right now, but hopefully learning similar to Uber some of the success factors that are making the technology work and drive value for all of your different stakeholders. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, one thing I wanted to add about the last question, which is how do we move, from pilot? I think pilots are great. It's a way for people to do a toe dip, right? It doesn't cost a lot. Sometimes they're free. And it's a way to learn and understand and maybe look at ways to optimize your supply chain. The challenge that tech folks like me have is that we're not generally great at putting it into terms that our buyers understand. KPIs. Do I get my boat this summer? Do I pay for my kid's horse? The things that are intensely personal, if they hit their KPIs, suddenly you've got their interest and they're sitting up in their chair. So I think that, and you see this a lot in the consulting business, when you've got technology solution providers that can't make that translation, they just talk about the tools. I've got a blockchain hammer and everything looks like a nail and it's so cool. No one cares. What people care about is do they hit their KPIs? And so I think that's a key point that I wanted to make to get us past these pilots, because I think pilots are the way to go in the short term, but we got to grow up and move past those awkward teenage years. Right now we're working, speaking of pilots, on with Feeding the Northwest, which is part of Feeding America, and I want to give a shout out to the Feeding America people out there. I see you out there in the chat window. We've been working with Feeding the Northwest for about 6 months now, and we're learning, they're learning. How many loads, they mentioned how many loads they could have saved if they'd had our technology sooner. They've also never had this kind of data before where, in food banks and food insecurity institutions, velocity is super important. And so they've never had this data that sort of addresses and provides proof points around velocity, knowing when temperatures go out of variance. Truck drivers are a huge shortage right now. That's so you don't have as much bargaining power when this is the case. So the truck driver will say, I didn't leave the door open on the reefer. It was all good, and how do you know? So or they didn't have the right equipment and they parked overnight in Montana and all of the crop froze in the truck. So it becomes he said, she said, and between the driver and the logistics company and the insurance company, it's just a pain in the butt. So now they know for sure what's going on, and they're generally thrilled to have that data.
That's fantastic. Jess, you all at Appeal have had quite a bit of success scaling over the last several years, at least from an outsider's perspective. We were joking about when we were prepping for this panel the other day, how I've followed Jess on LinkedIn for years, but never had the chance to connect with her directly. So at least from where I sit scrolling on my phone on LinkedIn, it seems like Appeal has had a lot of success with scale. And I'm curious, as you think about especially this new hyperspectral imaging software, what some of the success factors may have been with the coding technology that you're thinking about applying as you think about bringing this imaging technology to the market now.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's like we have some stuff where we're a little bit farther ahead, but we're still very much in that pilot phase with some other things. And I think that really building off of Eric's point about not just having a hammer and looking for nails, really thinking about both of our, current product offerings being tools and figuring out with our partners, how does this tool create value in this specific scenario, in this specific supply chain? And, we talk about, focusing on one produce category, but even within that, the product is totally different depending on the, are we treating avocados in Peru that are being sold in the EU? Or are we treating them in California that are sold in Nevada? And that's kind of the same for how we think about the imaging technology. Because we have these, 30 plus integrations in produce packing houses, we already have the systems in place to kind of find those starting points to learn. And I think it's really about collaborating with our partners to figure out how these insights, how this data with the advanced imaging technology can create value for them, value for actors downstream. How could consumers engage with this data and other data about everything from nutritional content to sustainability attributes of that supply chain, and how does that create value and more sustainable outcomes across the entire system. So we really view everything we do as a partnership with, we call our customers partners, because it is so important that we're looking at these issues together and really viewing the solutions we're creating as tools, and learning from them along the way.
That's great. Thank you. I'm reflecting as I'm listening, and even specifically on this topic of advanced imaging technology, there were a number of these solutions that were modeled in the most recent release of the Insights engine, where we were actually able to put financial and environmental impact data behind them. But there were a number that were emerging, and advanced imaging is the perfect example of that, where it's so new that we just don't know what the full potential of it is yet. But it's really exciting to see these technologies coming to market, and kind of this leap of faith happening in the food waste arena. And I'm curious if there are other emerging technologies that you all are seeing in your work and your day-to-day life that you're excited about, that if you had your millions of dollars to go invest in tomorrow, you might jump on. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I can jump in. So there are really sort of four things I think are exciting. There's a investment firm called Culterra Capital that has created sort of a Gartner hype curve of food supply chain sort of sectors or subsectors, if you will, and some of them are really, really interesting. We're, as I mentioned, using printed electronics. I think the right now, when you talk about the cost of something like this, it's prohibitive. If we get into a world where we're using printed electronics and not copper, solder, lead, we're gonna start seeing a change in the economics, which is going to drive behavioral change. There are predictive analytics that are out there. Mostly they're focused on predictive ETA, like when is the truck going to arrive so I can have people on the dock to pick up the load. and reduce my dwell time. But I think the cooler thing is prescriptive analytics, where we can actually tell people what to do. We're not just drowning them in data and dashboards, as I mentioned before. Most of our audience are not data scientists. When we're talking about complex event monitoring and rerouting and things like that and counseling them, we need a system that can actually help them make sense of the data and make changes. I love the computer vision stuff that Jess is doing. Super impressive. And what we're looking into now is using cameras within the containers to basically verify what the humans are seeing. Someone's got to be at the truck when it gets loaded and verify what's getting loaded. Someone's got to be at the end when it gets unloaded. And someone needs to know what's happening inside the truck. Are things falling over? Was the door open longer than normal? So using computer vision to monitor what's actually happening in the truck is huge. And then freshness rankings. We have our sell by dates, we have our harvested dates, but what if we could use this data to produce better analytics around freshness based on proof, not on just sort of vagaries. So those are the things I'm seeing that are pretty cool.
That's great to hear. I'll put a little plug in. If you Google Deloitte Future of Fresh, there's a video that we put together a few years ago of kind of my team's like wildest ideas of how could we upend the supply chain for food, to think about how all these different technologies could come together and move food faster, better, to ensure quality and reduce waste. And one of the things that we did a lot of exploration on was this idea of dynamic routing. So if you know that like a crate fell over in the back of the truck, stop going to San Diego and go to LA instead because it's closer. You just lost a day of freshness. But that also takes capacity in the trucking system. And Abhinav, it makes me think of the work that you all are doing with with Uber Freight, because that's one of the challenges that we've run into of, well, you can reroute, but then you don't have a truck, enough capacity left in the trucking system to get food to the stores in San Diego that need it, as an example. And it seems like that could be a perfect opportunity to integrate with your work.
That's right. Kind of specifically to the logistics industry, one kind of key challenge is these deadheads, like empty trucks or loads that you're not fulfilling the capacity of the freight carrier essentially. And one of the things that you can bring is sort of algorithmic bundling to highlight round trips to carriers where you can make sure, kind of like Uber Pool, that recognizes we're trying to take a pool ride where people are, and then kind of matching your car to the destination where people are going and where they're geographically located. Algorithmic bundling can help there, and it allows then on the carrier essentially to have sort of a clean round trip, because if a truck's moving from San Francisco to DC, ultimately they might want to get back to San Francisco. And so what algorithmic bundling allows you to do is sort of highlight those loads that will allow you to go back while minimizing deadhead, so it's sort of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or bouncing loads for whatever reason. If you have a mechanical failure, etc., and let's say it's a time sensitive product that needs to be moved, you could bounce the load for it to be picked up again to minimize waste and spoilage. So there are just tremendous sort of potential and promise of some of bringing in algorithms, and as Eric was saying, some of these prescriptive or predictive technologies to support this area.
There's so much exciting, just thinking through what Abhinav was just talking about, and like fresh produce, how much goes to waste just because it's not valuable enough for you to spend the extra time and energy to find an outlet. And when we think about like our coding technology and creating additional time, it's like, okay, but do they still know? Like if they have more time, where does it go? If it's half a load, how do you? So I think there's so many cool opportunities there. I think looking at the other end of the supply chain and thinking about that idea of driving demand for these kind of interventions, how that data ends up being associated with the food downstream. So like labeling and like fresh produce, what you have, a sticker that's like this big, or you have a lot of plastic packaging, which, we don't want to have packaging just for the purpose of communicating more information. And so I think that's an area that I don't know that there's any specific technologies that have emerged as like, this is the one that's going to fill that gap. But I think it's an area where I'm really excited to see what innovations come down the line. You see everything from like laser labeling to edible QR codes, or like some of these ideas that are super exciting to see. And even dynamic pricing for food on store shelves is starting to happen in Europe, where how do we make sure that the days that are left are used by consumers, and we're not only buying what's got the longest time or the longest legs. And so discounting things in real time, I think there's so much exciting that's happening there that can make sure that everything we're doing upstream is being put to good use, where we're trying to create this time to reduce food waste later on.
That's fantastic. I think it was Eric who made the point earlier, we've got to invest in the technology and the solutions to capture the data, but then we've got to do something with it, right? And when you not only connect it to the business and meeting an internal business leaders KPIs about on shelf availability, et cetera, but you actually connect it all the way to the consumer with things like dynamic pricing and potentially even lowering prices to get more fresh product in people's hands, or moving some of that product that has a shorter shelf life out of the store rather than letting it go to waste. I think it gets really exciting when you start to see that real change. On that note, I'm just keeping an eye on time, and we've got about 10 minutes left. So I think we'll just do a quick round robin, if our panelists don't mind, and just ask for final thoughts, kind of any key takeaways or key thoughts that you want to leave our participants with today. And then I'll pass it back over to Refed to wrap this up. Abhinav, can I call on you first?
Sure. No, final thoughts. We're always looking for partners to work with in this particular area, and particularly at Social Impact. And partnerships are crucial for us. And I think one of the challenges is to find the right partners to work with, partly because of issues of capacity and scale and how quickly we can move. And so we would love to hear from what other folks are doing on the ground and other organizations who are working in this area. I would love to have the opportunity to have a conversation to see how we might be able to help. We have certain capabilities, and we have some resources that that we could share, and we'll be happy to provide, because this is a hugely important area that needs to be addressed. But we want to make sure that we are working with organizations that have the expertise that we don't, and have the relationships on the ground that we might not have. And so it's more an invitation for the ongoing conversations that I hope to have with many organizations working in this space, kind of exploring how we could work together.
That's fantastic. I have a feeling your inbox is about to get very full. Eric or Jess, please go ahead. Final thoughts?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, one I guess this is more of a final thought. And one way we're trying to think about this at Appeal is really taking this systems perspective to the food waste challenge. I know we're focused on really one of those stages right here, but in our conversation, we've touched every stage, because I think we know that food waste can't be managed just between two nodes in the supply chain. It's all interconnected. And so just to kind of leave that thought with how we not just think about how the time or data or insights we create here end up being valuable downstream, create demand for things upstream, and also how incentives are aligned across that system to promote the scaling and development of new solutions at each stage. So really just emphasizing that systems perspective and how critical that is to addressing these challenges.
Very much so. Thank you.
You are so wise. It's ridiculous. I mean, I'm just nodding violently over here, because those of us on the call, we're looking at this from a holistic sort of whole system perspective, but a lot of our customers just have a little niche that they're working on, and just their worries, their concerns, whether they're producer, processor, logistics company, warehouse, DC, whatever. And the only way that we can see the failure points and head them off is by having that sort of supply chain wide perspective. A lot of the solutions are just little point solutions that take care of my little piece of this chain, and that's where the opportunity is. That's where that we have to get people past the exhaustion. We got to get them thinking more broadly in order to really reduce the food waste. We have the tech, we just need the will. To Jess's point, it's food waste is oftentimes a secondary consideration, as much as we hate to say that or hear that. And so REFED's done a great job in translating this into a capital waste issue to be dealt with, and that drum just needs to get banged louder and more often, to educate people, get them to understand what's going on and how to take their first step.
Thank you for that, Eric. And to Jess and Abhinav, really appreciate the panelists' insights today. I speak for myself when I say, even following on having a prep call for this conversation earlier this week, learned even more today. So I hope it was as insightful and interesting to our participants as it was for me. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it back to Angel, but appreciate everybody's time today and hope that we'll all have the opportunity to continue the discussion going forward.
Thank you, Blythe. Yeah, what an awesome conversation. I also learned a lot today. And also want to thank our panelists, Abhinav, Eric, and Jess. Really, thank you for sharing your insights and perspectives. And Blythe, thank you for moderating today's session. It was really wonderful learning about the work all of you are doing to help reduce food waste, and we really appreciate you joining us today. And of course, I want to thank all of our wonderful attendees out there from across the nation for taking time out of your day to join us. As a follow-up, we'll be sending out an email with a link to a recording of today's installment, along with some highlights from our discussion. Now remember, this is just the second installment of our 7-part series digging into the key action areas of REFED's roadmap to 2030. Our next installment is on July 28th, so mark your calendars. It focuses on the third key action area of the roadmap to 2030, which is refining product management. We all know that perfectly matching supply and demand is ideal, yet nearly impossible. And even the best efforts of forecasting and inventory management can lead to excess waste. So in our next installment, we'll be exploring how solutions like intelligent forecasting and fulfillment, dynamic pricing, flash sale apps, and others can help better align purchases with sales, optimize on-site handling, and proactively plan for surplus. And to give you just a little sneak peek, I'm excited to share that Matt Schwartz, CEO from Afresh, will be joining us from that conversation. And of course, if you have any questions or feedback, please reach out to us at insights@refed.com. And if you liked what you heard today, sign up for the new REFED Food Waste Action Network. It's all about working together to reach our 2030 food waste reduction goal.